Hello. James Arthur Baldwin, born in the year 1924, was an American novelist, playwright, essayist, poet, and activist. In order to understand Baldwin's first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, we need to know something about Baldwin's life, as Go Tell It on the Mountain is a semi-autobiographical novel. The novel was published in the year 1953. James Baldwin was born to Emma Burdiss Jones, who left Baldwin's biological father because of his drug abuse. She moved to Harlem, where Baldwin was born. In New York, Jones married a Baptist preacher, David Baldwin, with whom she had 8 children. Her husband also had a son from a previous marriage, who was 9 years older than James. The family was poor, and Baldwin's stepfather treated him more harshly than his other children. His intelligence, combined with the persecution he endured in his stepfather's home, drove Baldwin to spend much of his time alone in libraries. By the time Baldwin had reached adolescence, he had discovered his passion for writing. During his teenage years, Baldwin followed his stepfather and attended meetings of the Pentecostal church. During a euphoric prayer meeting, he converted and became a junior minister. Before long, at the Fireside Pentecostal Assembly, he was drawing larger crowds than his stepfather had done in his day. However, by the age of 17, Baldwin was disillusioned with the religion and regarded his time in the pulpit as a way of overcoming his personal crisis. He therefore left the church despite his father's expectation that he should become a preacher. Later, Baldwin publicly described himself as non-religious. Much of his writing is actually against the black church. During his teenage years, Baldwin began to realize that he was gay. Disillusioned by American prejudice against black people, as well as wanting to see himself and his writing outside of an African American context, he left the United States in 1948 at the age of 24 to settle in Paris. Baldwin wanted not to be read as merely a Negro or even merely a Negro writer. He also hoped to come to terms with his sexual ambivalence and escape the hopelessness that many young African American men like himself succumbed to in New York. Baldwin returned to the United States in the summer of 1957, while the civil rights legislation of that year was being debated in Congress. He was active during the civil rights movement, regularly visiting America and participated in several protests, despite the hostility many leaders of the movement had towards homosexuals. As a major figure in the civil rights movement in the United States, and particularly in his home city of Harlem, New York, Baldwin was frequently interviewed in documentaries and television programs about the African American experience. So, what happens in Baldwin's literary works? What does he talk about? Baldwin's novels, short stories, and plays fictionalized fundamental personal questions and dilemmas amid complex social and psychological pressures. Themes of masculinity, sexuality, race, and class intertwine to create intricate narratives that run parallel with some of the major political movements toward social change in mid 20th century America, such as the civil rights movement and the gay liberation movement. As such, Baldwin's protagonists are often, but not exclusively, African American, while gay and bisexual men also frequently feature as protagonists in his literature. These characters often face internal and external obstacles in their search for social and self-acceptance. In 1953, James Baldwin's first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, a semi-autobiographical Bildungsroman, was published. Bildungsroman? It's a literary genre that focused on the psychological and moral growth of the protagonist from youth to adulthood, in which the character change is important. The Harlem native was also among the first to criticize the black church beyond a black-white dynamic in his largely autobiographical novel. Baldwin, a former child preacher tormented by his preacher stepfather Baldwin, places the black church under a microscope, examining its historical function as well as its repressive effects in this particular novel. While it's clearly understood that the black church disdains homosexuality, there is an unstated homoerotic tension within the novel. His first collection of essays, Notes of a Native Son, appeared 2 years later in 1955. This is a collection of 10 essays, mostly tackling issues of race in America and Europe. Baldwin's second novel, Giovanni's Room, written in 1956, well before the gay liberation movement, is noteworthy for bringing complex representations of homosexuality and bisexuality to a reading public with empathy and artistry, thereby fostering a broader public discourse of issues regarding same-sex desire. It focuses on the events in the life of an American man living in Paris and his feelings and frustrations with his relationships with other men in his life, particularly an Italian bartender named Giovanni, whom he meets at a Parisian gay bar. Giovanni's Room caused great controversy when it was first published in 1956 due to its explicit homoerotic content. Baldwin was again resisting labels with the publication of this work. Despite the reading public's expectations that he would publish works dealing with African American experiences, Giovanni's Room is predominantly about white characters. With the novel Another Country, James Baldwin stretched conversations regarding personal and racial identity issues further by adding homosexuality and consensual interracial relationship to the African American literary discussion. The Fire Next Time is a 1963 non-fiction book by James Baldwin containing 2 essays. Around the time of publication of The Fire Next Time, Baldwin became a known spokesperson for civil rights and a celebrity noted for championing the cause of black Americans. He frequently appeared on television and delivered speeches on college campuses. The essays talked about the uneasy relationship between Christianity and the burgeoning black Muslim movement. Baldwin's next book-length essay, No Name in the Street, published in the year 1972, also discussed his own experience in the context of the later 1960s, specifically the assassinations of 3 of his personal friends, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. An unfinished manuscript, Remember This House, was expanded and adapted for cinema as the Academy Award nominated documentary film I Am Not Your Negro. He concluded his career by publishing a volume of poetry, Jimmy's Blues, as well as another book-length essay, The Evidence of Things Not Seen. During his lifetime, as well as since his death, Baldwin was seen not only as an influential African American writer, but also as an influential immigrant writer, particularly because of his numerous experiences outside the United States and the impact of these experiences on his life and his writing. James Baldwin had settled in Saint Paul de Vence in the south of France in 1970. On December 1st, 1987, Baldwin died from stomach cancer in Saint Paul de Vence, France. He was buried at the Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale near New York City. In an interview with the Bookstand BBC, Baldwin explains his motivation for writing fiction about marginalized groups, stating, "I think that if I am a novelist with a message, it's only one, and that would be the effort that one has got to make. According to me, the very dangerous effort one has got to make to deal with other people as though they were simply human beings. From my point of view, no label and no slogan and no party and no skin color and indeed no religion is more important than the human being." In the next video, we will examine the novel Go Tell It on the Mountain. Thank you.